I'm Hazel. I am the CEO of Fox Security, but I'm also still a CISO at Ayvens. I'm outgoing, so this is why this is presented to you today as Fox Security. So what I wanted to talk about was AI. I can see you're all very excited by that. It's not technical, so don't worry, because I'm not either. So this was a question that got asked to me not that long ago in a work environment, and basically the question was, are we using AI? So I'm going to do a little bit of audience participation because I know everybody loves that. So who is consciously using AI within your workplace at the moment? Good, I like to see hands. Who's not putting the hand up because they don't want to participate? I see you at the back. So who isn't using AI and that's a conscious decision? Right, how do you know?
Because of the definition of what I believe.
Okay. How do you stop your... no, spoilers. So my answer to this was, did we just roll out the latest version of Microsoft 365? Did we just update all of our browsers, and is that now baked in? Are we looking at all of our users' devices to make sure they're not enabling AI tools? We can't, because they're personal devices, so it's everywhere. Spoilers. I'm not going to skip to the end, but the end message is you need to control it. But I'm going to take you through some words first, aren't you pleased? So the definitions are of artificial intelligence and large language models are up on the screen. And the definitions are quite important now, because if you asked me 2 years ago, am I worried about AI? I'd have gone no, because it's just machine learning. It's just large language stuff. We're just playing around with it. But we've moved on so quickly in the last 2 years that this is now everywhere. You can't get away from it. And when we get to the last slide, you'll see my thoughts on it. But if you want the sciencey part or the words part, actually, I'm going to give you the disclaimer now. Because this is the talk on AI, I had AI write this for me. I'm not even ashamed of that, because this is going to be our world. So I did some fact-checking on the train. You'll be pleased to know that. But largely, the rubbish formatting of this is because of AI. So how is it changing our world? And some of these things are positive, so it's not going to be a I hate AI talk. Automation, efficiency, content generation, decision making, all good things. But the most important thing for me is it gives me a kick up the arse. Because when I get in a kind of rut of writing presentations or needing to talk about a particular topic, I'll go, oh look, there's the laundry that needs doing. Or I haven't vacuumed for a while, I'll do that. Or I'm sure the dog needs going out. Or look, I need to book a holiday. So there's all manner of things that get in the way of me actually doing the task in hand. And other models are available, but ChatGPT has really helped me stop that procrastination. So in a world where we are really focused on one thing that we need to do in our workplace, but actually there's so much going on around us that we're distracted all the time, this is a good starting point. So I really enjoy it for that. Anybody else got that problem? And it just gives you that kick up the backside, doesn't it, to get started. It points you in the right direction. But there is a catch. This is where you get some lovely AI-generated imagery as well. So misinformation is a problem. And LLMs generating false content is kind of out of control a little bit. Because deep fakes, fake news, we've all heard about it, but AI-driven phishing, threats and attacks that are going to be AI kind of controlled, how do we protect ourselves against that? How do we combat those sorts of things using the same sorts of technology? It's all questions that we're still asking ourselves, but actually the people doing those attacks, the people behind those attacks are already ahead of us. So we need to be looking at how we combat those things with the same kind of technology. So the reason why misinformation was important to me, and actually AI gave me a lot of topics to talk about, but I chose some of the ones that I've just cut down for this 15 minutes. So have I got 30 minutes? Oh, I'll slow down a bit then.
Special.
I got 30 minutes just
Yeah.
because I'm special. That's nice, isn't it?
I don't know why.
They must know that I ramble. Right.
Sorry,
Sorry, everyone. You've got me for 30 minutes. So voters in key elections are being recommended fake AI-generated videos. This is what the BBC reported in June last year. Interestingly, when I asked ChatGPT to tell me about misinformation of AI, it called out Google's Gemini. Didn't talk about itself. Blamed the Google tool. I didn't have time on the train to check it the other way around, but maybe I've got 30 minutes, we'll do it now. So AI is only as good as the information that you put in it. It's, you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. We all know that from the days before AI. So, bless you. Gemini incorrectly said that the NHS did not recommend vaping as an aid to quit smoking. Okay, is that really that damaging? It doesn't really matter. But it also said that Rishi Sunak and Nicola Sturgeon were still in office after they'd left. Is that really that damaging? In a silo, probably not. But if you're looking at those things in the context of a wider, how are we advising our general public on health? How are we influencing people to vote in our elections? Maybe this then becomes more important. So it's taking those things into context, into what's happening in the world. The misinformation on its own might not be that damaging, but in a wider context could be. And if you then look at your own organisation in the sense of that, what could it do? How could it damage your organisation? The other thing to consider is bias, because it's only as good, I just said this a minute ago, as the data that you're putting in. So if you are training your models with biased data, it's going to make biased decisions. And some examples of that, 2019, I think it was, Amazon had a recruiting tool which showed bias against women applying for technical roles, which obviously is a bad thing. So it was trained on historical hiring data that Amazon held, and that showed a gender bias within those technical roles. So what they did was just scrap the tool. Interestingly, though, YouTube content moderation disproportionately demonetized or hid LGBTQI+ content because of the related words and themes being flagged as inappropriate because of its training data. Now, what they did was make updates to the training data, try and update the model, try and make it better, but they didn't remove it, and the issues still persist. So there's a different approach to these things from different organisations, but it's really important to understand from your organisation what you're comfortable with. Spoilers, this is going to turn into a risk conversation. Security threats is the other theme that was thrown up as a potential consideration. So I touched on it a little bit earlier. Prompt injection, AI-written malware, phishing attacks, they're all going to be enhanced by the use of AI. Everything's going to get quicker, better, slicker. So how are you going to protect yourself against those things? Threat actors automating and scaling attacks is the biggest problem, because if you aren't protecting yourself, again, I said this already, but if you aren't protecting yourself in a similar way, how are you going to be able to match what they're throwing at you? How are you going to be able to combat these increasingly sophisticated attacks unless you're using the same kinds of technology? Now, I'm going to say favourite, but it's not favourite in a good way, but data leakage and IP risks, so intellectual property. If you've got employees maybe going, okay, we've had this policy kicking around for a couple of years, it's now my job to update it. What's the latest content that I need to include? What's the kind of most appropriate way of updating this and doing it quickly? Because if you've got laundry or a dog or a holiday to book or something shiny that distracts you, maybe you'll choose to use ChatGPT, others are available. And you'll put that policy, the old policy, into there, but maybe that also includes intellectual property or content that you don't want to be sharing. That has now become part of that machine's learning. It's become part of its database. So that's a really basic example, but if you start putting in there kind of, I don't know, code, employment contracts, anything else that would be deemed sensitive data for that organisation, do you want your staff just piling it into there blindly, creating the outcomes and the objectives that you've asked them to do, but what's the trade-off for that? What's the price of that? Because these things are free, or are they? So, the examples that AI gave me, and I did fact check these were, attackers used AI-based voice synthesis to impersonate the CEO of a UK-based energy company, which resulted in the loss of 220,000 euros, I think they said. And that did happen, and that was because the deep fake mimicked the tone and accent so closely of the CEO that the CFO wasn't able to say that it wasn't that person. So I imagine those people would probably talk quite a lot, the CFO and the CEO. So if it was that good that it convinced the CFO on a short telephone call that it was legitimate, that's a real concern. Now that was 2019. I did fact check it, so it's Trend Micro that said this in 2019. Lots of other sources said it too. And I imagine that things have only increased and improved since then. So if that was possible back then, 6 years on, how good is it now? So if you aren't stopping and checking or putting processes in place to double check, it is really possible to get hooked into these things. Nicely moving on to the ethical risk, because data misuse, lack of consent, privacy violations, GDPR complications and audit challenges. So undermining public trust I'll come to in a minute, but the first 2 bullet points on there are really important because, again, you don't know what this thing is going to do with the information once you've put it in there. You've got no control over it, you've just given it away. So it's helped you in the short term, it's helped you get the thing that you need, but what's the long-term impacts of that? Where's that data going to go next? And it's not just a case of sovereignty or who owns it or what's going to happen with it. What can it be used for next? And do you want to be associated with that? So the one that I did pull out as the example of this was really interesting for me because in 2021, the UN suggested that autonomous drones had been used in Libya to select and engage targets without human intervention. So a lack of accountability for life and death decisions and possible violations of international humanitarian law. Show of hands again, who would be comfortable with our armed forces using drones to make decisions about life or death without any human interaction? Who would be comfortable? Good, no hands. So you'd all be really uncomfortable about that, but that's potentially what this data is being used for. So there's ethical risks associated with all of it. So it doesn't just go, help me write a presentation, what's the packing list that I need for a trip to Iceland for 3 days? Wasn't very good, by the way. Give me a route planner for the southwest of England. There's really innocent things that you can ask it and it's really useful for. But if you aren't conscious of where that data might end up, what might be the use of it, if it's free, it's not really free. So why should you care? Why should your organisations care? And this is the important thing from me and the reason for this presentation. And I only did it for 15 minutes. So AI is going to be in use in your organisations, whether you've consciously said we're using it or not. And I recently listened to a podcast where somebody said if you haven't got control over your data, yes, it was Gemma, she's in the audience right now. If you haven't got a policy, you need a policy. So if you're telling people you're not consciously using AI, you need to tell them how they can use it, because they will use it. And it's not a case of we don't use it, so therefore nobody's going to use it. It's so prevalent in everything that it will sneak in all bits of software updates. Unless you've got eyes everywhere, they are going to be using it in some shape or form. So the better way to handle it is to have a policy that says, this is how you can use AI. This is how we want you to use AI. And you give them the ability to use it, and then you expose and make it transparent, and you've got accountability. And that's a better way of controlling it than saying, no, we're not using it. It's, as I said at the start of this, it's 2 years since I sort of turned around and said, no, I'm not worried about it, because look at it, it's just machine learning. It's nothing important, it's not exciting. That's not for me, that's not going to be in my lifetime of career. And 2 years on, I'm eating those words every day. So you can align, if you wanted to, with ISO 42001, which is a new standard for AI. There's obviously the EU AI Act, and you can align to the principles of that if you wanted to go to the nth degree. But what I would suggest is that if you haven't got anything, the bare minimum is to create a policy for AI use for everybody. That's your starting point, and then you bake it into things like your secure software development lifecycle or your project processes, and it becomes a consideration for everything that you do. So it's not a case of, oh, and what about AI afterwards? You've already considered it at the start, and it becomes part of your normal processes. You can you can look at accountability and transparency within that, but you can also give people control in terms of why they're using it. So I'm not a fan of saying no because we're security. I'm not a team of no. So if you give people a way in which they can play around with it in development spaces or in a controlled manner again, and you give them some guidelines and some buffers that they can work within, then you've got them on side. And I'm teaching you all to suck eggs here because you must know this, but if you tell them you can do it in this environment, then they'll come and talk to you about it. And it's no different to any other technology that we use. It's just another form of, not necessarily control, but this is how we want you to do it so that we can see what's happening and the impact, because we're all learning about it still. So expose and manage the risks. This is where it turns into a risk conversation. It's the same as any organizational technology risk. If you know about it, you can manage it. If you don't know about it, it's still going to happen anyway, and then it'll surprise you. So don't be surprised by it. Have I eked it out long enough yet?
Take a question or two if you want.
Okay, well, this is my last slide. So unchecked
Otherwise we'll see you at the
AI
next
is not just a technology risk. I'll come to you. We have a duty to lead with clarity, ethics, and foresight, and the future of cybersecurity is AI. Now, I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago. I'd be like, that's not in my lifetime. But it's here, and we need to get on board with it and control it. So, questions? I'm not an expert, by the way. AI wrote this.
No, I don't think any of us are AI experts in this particular moment in time. I did talk very similar to this a couple of weeks ago. One of the things, everybody remember email, everybody remember things like Nobel, GroupWise, when it all came in. The problem was that the majority of people now look at email, and looked at email back then as an instant messaging service. It didn't, it emulated the standard mail system. My problem is I have a fear that everybody will say that AI is ChatGPT as opposed to ChatGPT is an AI tool.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about how we prevent that misconception?
I don't know that you can, because if you take it out of the technology context, what do you clean your floors with if you've got a carpet? Is it a vacuum cleaner? Is it a Hoover?
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So I don't know that we can control that. So if people understand that an AI engine is ChatGPT, well, they've got a basic concept of what it is. So I can work with that. I don't think they need to know all of the names. I might be wrong, but that would be my take on it. If they understand ChatGPT's functionality and the risks that are associated with that, that's fine.
Hazel, you mentioned the EU AI Act.
Yes.
And they've got the AI Pact.
Apparently, yeah.
A few hundred companies, including Microsoft.
He's calling you out, Sarah.
There's a UK bill going through the House of Lords apparently about this as well.
Yeah. I am not familiar with it, but I have heard that there is a bill going through, yeah.
So the idea is that governments are starting like way too late.
I mean, my personal thoughts, and my personal thoughts only, is that happens with governments, that everything is all a bit too late. We've done all the development and the shiny and the exciting before we get to controlling it. That's no different to any other technology. So my plea, I guess, is within your own organisations, embrace it, look at it. It's going to happen. It is happening. So how do you manage the risks of it? And it's not a case of waiting for government to tell you, because they never will tell you. They might bring in policies and guidelines and standards and frameworks, but it's still up to you to embed what's best for your organisation. Sorry, I can't hear you so well. No comment. It is an interesting topic, and we have spoken about it in the past in terms of sort of the rights for art. So some of I don't know if I dare call this art, but some of these images that were generated by AI were obviously using images that it's been fed. So there's images out there already all over the internet, I don't need to tell you this, and it's kind of created something based on the prompt. So is that intellectual property? Have I got copyright over that? No. And if it is so similar to somebody else's, this is just my personal opinion, if it's so similar to somebody else's piece of art that it can be seen as the same, then there might be a challenge. But I think what you'd find in reality is, if it's even the smallest bit different, it is a different piece of art. And if you look at plagiarism in terms of text, then anybody who's been to university will know that they use tools to scan your dissertations and your assignments and things like that to look for plagiarism, and there is a tolerance. It's the same as any risk that you're willing to tolerate, that you will know what your limits are. And so if it is 98% similar to another piece of art, maybe there is a challenge there, yeah, but it's still 2% different. So I don't know is the answer because I'm not an expert, but I think it's an interesting space that we're going to find out.
You talked about organisations writing policies. What do you feel about AI writing policies for the organisation?
Again, I think it's interesting because if you look at the positives that have coming out of this generation of AI, you can see, for me, it's really helpful because it's a starting point. As long as you don't go into it blindly thinking, I'm just going to let that do it, because it's got an impact on, I skipped through one of the slides, but decision making in credit and finance. It's got an impact on recruitment. It's got an impact on lots of things, and anything that you put into it, it's going to have a decision outcome. So if that is bias or it's full of misinformation, you definitely shouldn't rely on it. Again, I'm not an expert, but if you're creating your own model and it's a green field, it's a blank canvas, and you're feeding it information that's relevant to your organization only, you still need to do some checking, but it's going to be better than something that is available freely on the internet because it's all the time it's learning and it's gathering more information. So should you rely on it? No. And if you look at any of the, GDPR is a great example where you still have the right to be able to have a human look at your decision-making process. There still needs to be that human interaction, which is why I called out that example from the UN. Do we want to give over control completely to these models? No. I would suggest we don't. Sorry, I don't know who was pointing at then. Let's go with you first.
Thank you for the presentation. Thing is that I've got a question, but I'm trying to combine it into two, basically. Maybe you can connect it together, possibly.
Let's find out.
So,
I could use ChatGPT to help.
that's true. The thing is, okay. So maybe one question would be, so do you think that currently companies in general, okay, it doesn't matter what sort of company that is, whether it's a small, medium, or even an enterprise company, do you really think that companies in general are really, really ready in terms of using AI as a methodology of, for example, running business? That's one.
Okay, I'll try and remember that one.
Yeah.
Can I answer it first and then you go and see a second one?
Okay, that's one. The second is...
No, hold. Or my brain will just go, no, I forgot that now. So do I think they're ready? I think it depends on lots of things. And my answers to most things will it depends. It depends on the organisation. It depends on what they're doing. It depends on their level of adoption for these things. It depends on their level of appetite for these things and their risk tolerance. So there's lots of it depends. I think if you are ready for it, you will become ready for it. You will put the effort in and you will learn about it and you will adopt those ways of working. If you are one of the people, like I used to be 2 years ago, that goes, it's not for me. It's not going to touch me. I think you're going to fall behind.
You're probably going to be set to oblivion at that time.
Maybe. What's your second question?
Oh, the second question would be, so do you really think that society is maybe ready for AI?
That is a really interesting question, and I think society is as ready for AI adoption now as they have been for any new or emerging technology ever. It's being forced upon us. You can't look at any Microsoft product, Apple products are also doing it as well, without it being embedded. I don't have an obvious choice to say no to those things. So general public will just go, oh yeah, it's now part of that. I can now make an emoji myself. Brilliant. But what's gathering the information in the background? Who's looking at those prompts? Who's creating a profile of me based on what crazy emojis I want to make on my phone? Because it's free, but is it? Sorry, you got a third question.
Oh, yeah. Last question would be...
It's monopolising here.
Maybe the last thing would be, so for example, it might relate to the last question. Okay, and maybe do you think that really obviously we're going to be, as a society, going to try to regulate AI systems anyway. Okay? But do you think then it should be the case that it should be centralized as such? So it's not really owned or such like controlled by any sort of authority. Maybe it might be, should be related by maybe government or possibly other.
Okay. Again, these are only my personal opinions.
Of course.
So I think if we try and regulate any technology, we'll stifle it. And so that's a firm no from me. But what we will probably find is that we'll get, like we have with all other emerging technologies over the past 20 years, guidelines. And we'll get frameworks and possibly standards, but we'll get examples of where it's been adopted in a poor fashion, and we can learn from that. And we'll get examples of where it's been really revolutionary in our world, and we can learn from that too. But I don't think we should stifle the technology and the advancement of it. One more?
So we're all aware of the hallucinations that LLMs
Yep.
produce, and we've all seen the case that's used all the time is the court case with made up citations. But then useful applications, not naming any, but you're constantly making up stories and it's reported to be factual and is often then has a correction 13 pages later. Do you think there's more hysteria around the hallucination because AI is in the news? And it's obviously it's kind of a bad name, but I think it makes news, right? It's like, oh, it's making this up. Do you think it is as much as a problem as, say, just general internet? I mean, Wikipedia's been producing stuff that's incorrect for decades now, and we haven't seen it as a blight on humanity that's going to correct the world.
Yeah, so this is a soapbox I'm trying not to get on, because this will be a long conversation. But as the lady at the front here asked earlier, do you want to put your entire reliance into AI helping you with those things or just doing it for you? Me, it's always going to be a firm no. I think media do a really good job with any topic of instilling a degree of hysteria into people, because that's what sells, that's what gets people to click on their news articles. So my message for everything AI is going to be do your own research and make sure the risks are acceptable to your own organisation or you personally. And don't necessarily pay attention to all of the hysteria, because there will always be hysteria.
Thank you.
Thank you.